Everyone, welcome back to this week's episode of SDRescue. I'm Austin Fuller. I'm joined once again by Grayson Fulbright, my co-host. And today we have a very special guest, Christina Finseth. Christina, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. I'm seeing some familiar names too rolling in, which is always exciting too.
Awesome. Yeah, it looks like we have a lot of guests today. Grayson, do you want to give us an intro? Grayson rewrote the email this week. It was provided to us from Christina. So we're really lucky to be able to dissect this email. This is going to be a fun episode.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm glad that I got the chance to kind of choose and take a look at the person who's, sending these emails to get more context on why they're sending it. Because often when we choose these emails and do a rewrite, we're often just kind of picking from our inbox and not getting the chance to actually get their perspective. So I'm really excited about this one. And what we're really going to be focused on, I think in this episode is going to be one, being concise and what that really means and where and how you should be shortening your emails. And two is kind of, again, we talk about this a lot on the show, but assumptions. When you are making assumptions or when you're trying to position your social capital to influence somebody to do something else, there are particular ways to do it, various ways to get it done. We're going to kind of take a look at the way that this seller went through and used assumptions and see if we can maybe not only shorten the email, but also maybe strengthen the assumptions that are being made.
Yeah, and and if anyone has questions or wants to, mention anything, please put it in the chat. We have somebody watching that for us, so we'll be happy to answer those questions as we go along. So without further ado, I think we'll jump into the email. All right. Christina, can you see that all right? Is that a Google Doc with the email in it? All right. Just want to make sure.
Perfect. Yep, we can see it.
Would you like to read the email, the original email here? And we'll go from there. It'd be great.
Yeah, for context, this is from someone on my team, which is kind of exciting because I think for me, I look at emails so much and sometimes it's hard to remove yourself from that. When you're looking at the same emails or roughly the same copy, it's hard to sometimes take a step back and look at it differently. So super excited to hear Grayson's feedback and Austin's feedback. But this email is a first touch email. And the subject line is simply, I'll just use Grayson as an example, Grayson about your LinkedIn posts or about your LinkedIn activity. So it's going off of, that kind of research. So, hi, Grayson, I was just looking at your LinkedIn profile, noticed you posted a few times over the past month with information on some open roles you're looking to fill. I assume reaching out via LinkedIn is one of your primary ways of getting candidates engaged, but how do you engage those candidates that don't respond via that first LinkedIn touch point? One thing I hear a lot is that it's nearly impossible to manage following up with people that don't respond via LinkedIn, and curious if you'd agree with that. With that said, I'd love to pick your brain to learn more about your current process, how you're managing those passive candidates who don't engage on LinkedIn, and see if we can help. I'd love to earn the right to talk through how whatever brand might fit in there. Let me know either way.
Great. Perfect. So let's take a look at the color coding from Grayson here. And one of the first things that I notice about the color code is normally when we get a prospecting email is it's tons of orange. Normally they lead with orange and they don't really ever get outside of that. So glad to see that there's a really good spread of color here, right? You have some ICP info, you have some storytelling and some pain points. So all good things right off the bat. You're on mute, Grayson. It's all right.
Man, I feel like I do that every week. One thing I wanted to point out is I love the fact that they're trying to highlight upfront the information that they've already gathered on this prospect. And I feel like people often use that personalization idea the wrong way, where it's like they're not careful about what they include. They're just, hey, you went to this college. Wow. But I feel like this is a really relevant way to actually use personalization because it all ties back to the email. Why am I saying that I noticed that you posted job postings on LinkedIn? Well, I'm saying that because I wanted to share this story about the challenges of using LinkedIn and then walk back into a conversation. It all connects and is very consistent. So I did want to make that shout out that when you use personalization, you want to ride that baby all the way down and help that personalization at the very beginning build momentum to someone actually taking action. And so I think that they did a wonderful job here with the intro.
Yeah, and I do want to validate this, like, because I don't get hit up a ton by recruiters on LinkedIn, but I do get hit up periodically, once a week or so. And I will say that of the like, I never get followed up with if someone messages me on LinkedIn. Like, it's a one and done sort of thing. If I don't reply on that first one, I never hear from them again. So I know that that's a real, having done some degree of talent acquisition in the past in my career, I know that that's a missed opportunity. And so, I mean, I think that story's on point, right? Where, okay, this is a real pain point. This is causing real business impact. And the +1 for not just leading and talking about your product, which is typically what happens in a lot of the emails we receive, where, this is a very problem centric email in that middle body, as opposed to just saying, hey, here's a feature that our product does. And then that's what people normally do, is they lead with the product feature and then they tell the story afterwards. Whereas normally the inverse and excluding the product feature is what creates good momentum, like Grayson was talking about.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And I think a good way to think about outreach too, just, side note, is like, this is your first impression, right? And so while that might not be the one that gets them to convert, you're all like, in the way that we kind of practice this is all of our emails reply in thread, because we do a lot of research on the front end normally as part of our process. And so that first email is usually much more personalized than maybe the subsequent ones where we're sharing some sort of piece of content that might be relevant to them. But at the same time, if you catch someone's attention on a second, third, or fourth step, we want them to be able to refer back to this. So again, it's always still going to be somewhat of that first impression, in the sense that you can connect the story throughout your entire sequence. So I think, that's important to point out too. Like, it's important to have this first email be really pointed, but there's so many times we convert people, like sometimes 2 weeks later, off of different steps that all just kind of lead back to this.
Yeah, I think that's a really good call out. I get so many emails that I just kind of feel like secondhand embarrassment and like having them in my inbox and having to like absorb it and react to it. And so I think people need to do a better job of really thinking about that aspect of like, forget the outcome. You're either going to get the meeting or not get the meeting. They're either in market or not in market. There's not many things that you can control when you're in this sort of business development space. But one thing that you can control is how you position your brand, how you position your employer's brand, and how you influence thinking. And if you focus less on trying to, I almost feel like people on like the front line try to speed up top of funnel. Like they just think if they say the right thing, or if it's just long enough for the right topic, that it'll bang them. They're gonna be bottom funnel, ready to talk and ready to close next week. And I just don't think that's the case. And if you pull yourself out of that mindset and instead go into the mindset of, okay, I can't control this. I can't control that person. I can't control this timing, but I can control the relationship I have with this company and the influence that I have over time. It's a lot easier to think about, quote, first impressions, where I'm really trying to consolidate the biggest value that I can give to you and set the stage so that when I send a second email or third email, you're not getting more and more annoyed or wanting to start hitting that unsubscribe button. You're actually getting engaged or finding some curiosity, or maybe even reading and taking action on the email. And so I think that kind of duality of outcome versus really like thinking about your brand and the relationship first, I think that's a good call out, because even if it's a digital channel, like these are still people that you're talking to who have very, real influence over the outcomes that you're so seeking. What do you think, Christina?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think there is absolute intentionality behind how you space your steps and your cadence. And this is something that I don't think happens overnight, where you're just like, I know exactly when I should send this versus this through this particular channel. But after testing and finding kind of our A framework here, it is very intentional. You know, we do an email the first day. The second day might be the LinkedIn connection request. We're not going to do a LinkedIn voice message because Grayson accepted right now, and we really, really want to just like skip ahead. We're intentionally going to send another email a couple of days later and intentionally going to do a LinkedIn voice message or video message a few more days later. So now a week has kind of expired since we've touched you in different ways. And also, we're not connecting and pitching, right? Like there's, again, I think people are quick, like we want instant gratification. And sometimes we will sacrifice things to try to quickly get to that point of booking a meeting, but there is intentionality there. And the last thing you want to do is close the door on something because you were way too brash, direct. You sent too many steps in a very condensed period of time. At least in this regard, or the way that we kind of do things here with the framework is, you know, it's 7 to 9 steps over 14 days. And it's very warm. It's not super salesy. And then what ends up happening is people will either respond back with an insightful no. So you're not getting a lot of F-offs, quite frankly. You're getting people who will respond back and say, hey, not interested, or hey, I'm not interested because of XYZ, which gives you re-engagement. You know when to re-engage and how to re-engage. Maybe you're a step closer. But you're not closing the door. Because when you get an F-off, you then have to work to get off of like this pedestal that you suck at what you do, and then rebuild a relationship or a potential to a conversation. And that is 10 million times harder than just doing it a thoughtful and intentional way. That's my thought. I could probably go all day about that.
That's a good soapbox to stand on. So I actually was lucky enough where, so there's a bit of a disagreement right now with some of the older guard in my organization about messaging and such. And I was actually lucky enough to where one of our customers, an executive we primarily do enterprise size engagement. So this brand is really recognizable. I won't say it, but everyone would know this brand if you're it's a global brand. So one of our customers, the cybersecurity leader at a global brand, was having a discussion on a post from another cybersecurity leader at another global brand, an ideal customer, not our customer. And the customer's post was about how cybersecurity vendors need to stop using FUD, fear, uncertainty, doubt, in their marketing. It doesn't work, and they're tired of receiving emails about it and messaging about it, and not to ever do it again. And it was one of those bashing posts where it had an anonymized email body, and everyone in the comments were making fun of it. And I sent that post to our entire sales and marketing org and said, hey, here is literal customer feedback, our customer and our ideal customer making fun of all of the stuff that some of you advocate to do. And right. And so if you've sent that type of message to this person, he has just confirmed that you're blacklisted. Right. And Grayson is huge advocate of this. We've talked about this a lot on the show, that like you kill off more, you kill your potential business off, because the fact of the matter is most people you message aren't in market at the time you reach out to them. And if you do that, right, if you offend everybody in the market, well, then you don't have any more market. So, or for salespeople, it's a lot more relevant if you're, not your own business, your territory, right? A lot of people, it's geographic territory or industry vertical. And if you get known as the clown of the industry vertical or the spammer of the geographical region, that's going to be a really hard hole to dig out of.
Yeah. Well, and listen, to that end, there is no silver bullet, right? Like, you could be as thoughtful as you want to be. There are going to be some prospects that just don't get it and don't like it, and they're going to respond negatively. I think at the end of the day, it's about trying new things, understanding that not all of your prospects will potentially respond to the same type of outreach. And that's why you need to do multiple channels. That's why you need to be doing different types of copy to pick up different types of customers and how they respond better. But yeah. Good points.
And so about this email in particular, there's a couple. So this email is very warm, right? It doesn't offend. There, and like Grayson says, that it goes about assumptions, I think, in a pretty good way. It's, we were talking a little bit before the show, and we've seen this. It's a little wordy in the body, and then it trips up, I think, at least for me, at the call to action where it asks those, where it asks that first question at the end of the second paragraph, and then it goes into another call to action about picking one's brain. And Grayson is a big proponent of this too. This is a really big thing in his writing style, and I think it's a really good thing. Is that you only go down one path, right? You only want to reach one end with your CTAs. So I mean, I think those are areas we can improve, and we can take a look at. I think it's about the time in the show where we transition, start looking at how Grayson suggested we rewrite the email.
Yeah, we got
Yeah,
all
so while we're transitioning to the rewrite, I do want to say like that it's often good to stay focused in a CTA, but not necessarily keeping it down one path. I do often use what I call split CTAs, where if you're careful and you have the right two things to compare, it's almost kind of like in a shopping mall when you see choices, right? You can kind of like offer a few options that like are going to give you more yays on the easier yes than the bigger one, like email or call, something like that. And I think to briefly go to a point that Christina made before we move on to the rewrite, you mentioned insightful no's from prospects. And I just want to bow to you and praise you, because I love that. I feel like so many organizations refuse really to acknowledge the future value of prospects that an SDR takes the time to get in touch with, start a conversation with, and then just because they're simply not in market, or they don't have it's not the right timing, organizations almost tend to just push them aside. It's very narrowly focused on in-market leads. And I think that if you open up the possibilities to simply starting the conversation, not worrying about if it's yes, I'm interested, or yes, I want to call, but even if they say no, that's still a further step along kind of like the rapport journey and of the sales journey than them not ever responding, or them reading and ignoring your email. So I wanted to call that out, because I think that's amazing that your team is keeping that in mind. And that's I don't want to make any assumptions, but I'm sure that you guys are definitely getting some leads kind of like later in the process because of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is like, just because someone says no, not right now, I think there's another part, and maybe we can go into this after we go through the breakdown, but I don't think that there's enough focus also in the SDR role of how to objection handle in an email. And so I think there are some ways that you can maybe turn those insightful no's into a yes now, or even a yes later. But then it's also just knowing when to say, all right, this was a really good no. I have some information I need on when I can reach back out, and being okay with that, and walking away for now. But yeah, totally good points. We've had people come back later on though, or they've come through inbound 2-3 weeks later because they thought about it a little bit more. Something else came up. Absolutely.
That's doing it right.
Yeah.
I think if you have people coming through inbound based on a question you asked in your outbound, that's winning.
Yep, absolutely.
All right. Shall we transition?
Let's do it.
All right. Here is Grayson's rewrite. Grayson, you want to go ahead and read it this time? We'll mix it up.
Yeah, sure. Sure. So it goes, I just kind of ignored the subject line and assumed I'd keep it the same, because we tend not to focus on subject lines on this show. But hi, first name. I saw you recently posted on LinkedIn about a few open roles, and was curious how your team manages the recruiting process within LinkedIn. One of the biggest challenges of recruiting on social is how time consuming it is to manage data and conversation with candidates on a day-to-day basis. I'm hoping to show you a way to automate recruiting activity and eliminate data entry on LinkedIn using brand, and would love any feedback on how it potentially fit into your process. Would you be open to learning more?
I love it. I really, really do. You condensed it. It's actually not quite, it's easier not to get lost in that second paragraph, right? Because you're getting a little bit more to the point. And you took away the double CTA. So I like it.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think it's good. One of the things that I like about it is, purple and yellow are complementary colors. And I don't know if you did that on purpose when you built the color code, but I think the storytelling with pain points, if you're just looking at structure, is a really good way to do it, right? Is you tell a story in order to paint a picture, or to have somebody introspectively think about their status quo. I saw a post by Bilal Birchway, I think. I can't remember his last name, but Bilal, and he does the no fluff sales stuff. And he talked about how you sell against the status quo, not for your product. And I think this is how you do it, right? So you tell a story and paint a situation around a potential pain, and what the previous email already set, like, I don't know, this was probably one of your Grayson can talk about it, but this is probably one of the easier rewrites because the previous email already had set up the foundation, right? Like all of those qualities were already in the above email, where normally we have to create them because they're completely absent. So I just think that getting, describing the pain in a context through a story is how you get people to examine their own status quo and sell against that, and get them, like you said, and get them to come inbound 3 weeks later because they go and look at your stuff, or what happens is they probably weren't experiencing that thing in the message, and then they go and they relive that story and we're like, wait, didn't I get an email about this thing 2 weeks ago? Find it and go inbound.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that too. I think, and I like the open-ended question. I'm not going to lie. We go for the meeting. Like we definitely don't put calendar links in there, but we've always gone for the meeting mostly with a CTA. But I also like the idea of the open-ended question. I have seen that perform well depending on what type of email style you have. And so I think that fits really well here, is like, hey, would you just be open to learning more? Make it easy for them to say yes or no. So I like that part too.
And I think there's not really a right answer, because it depends on space and what type of companies you're targeting, and also, where and when in the cadence you're actually asking these questions. So I think going for the meeting at the beginning is no problem. Even I do it in certain circumstances. And I did want to kind of mention, because it looks like somebody had a question in the chat about how to use personalization kind of throughout the sequence. And so I wanted to just address that question as I'm introducing my thoughts on this rewrite, and say that when you're doing sales, even if you're kind of in an entrepreneurial space where you have a little bit more freedom, a little bit more time, and that's where my perspective comes from. So this is not conservative at all, but you have limited time. You have very limited time that you have dedicated to be able to actually research an account and a lead. And the way that I think about personalization is, once you've done the research, you shouldn't have just spent that time to go do research for one email. You should know beforehand kind of a set of either events or compelling triggers or information that you can use and then kind of sprinkle throughout your email. So I would say, to kind of answer your question, Tony, I would make the personalization as good as you can make it every time. Just kind of modify it as you go along, because there is something to be said of, if you just restate the same thing a different way, sometimes people are going to call you out on it. But with that being said, I really wanted to emphasize the personalization that was in this email. So I tried to basically take the beginning of the intro in the original and the email about his curiosity that was somewhere near the end, and I smushed them together, because that is the clearest, quickest way for me to explain why I'm reaching out to this persona. It's because I should have the information on hand that they are posting about jobs on LinkedIn, which is a qualification checkbox, and I'm simply curious how they're managing recruiting. I'm not positioning it as a sales conversation. I'm not even trying to position myself as someone really who is just going to like change their world until the very end. And it's really just more of a demo pitch. And so I'm really trying to ride the personalization here, because I know it's a first impression. I'm focusing less on the sale and more trying to say, hey, my name's Grayson. You probably don't know me. Well, here's an email about why I'm reaching out, and here's probably why I'm going to keep reaching out to you in the future, to try to set that stage and frame the conversation. And then I won't speak much about the stories, but we talk a lot about the use of stories and painting either future states or pains. And Austin's right. If you can find a good way to describe the situations that your prospects live through, oftentimes they're going to pay attention to you, because they know that you've either done the research or have the experience in the space to show that off.
Yeah, and I think a little bit differently about this, Grayson. So I'm going to offer a little bit of a unique perspective here. And I also, someone asked a question that I think is also important for us to touch on if we can, with what we have left, which is like what kind of content goes in a follow-up email. But to follow up on your points there, so we really only focus on a higher level of personalization in our first touch. And that usually is infusing a lot of their own words, whether it's content that they're posting, things like that. When I think of relevancy and over personalization, the rest of our steps are pretty much set, but it does require some manual effort, like leaving a voice message on LinkedIn or doing a video message on LinkedIn, etc. Make it a little bit easier on yourself. But I really think that relevancy comes at the prospecting level, not necessarily in having to spell it out every time that you touch that prospect. And what I mean by that is if you know that the people you're going after, you've got your target audience. I'm talking about like down pat. And also this banks on the fact that you have crystal clear content. If I was to just go and click on your website real fast in your signature block to tell myself what you do, I really believe that you almost don't even have to talk a whole lot about a problem solution in any of your touch points necessarily. Because I really think that if you have your prospects right and you cut through the noise, what'll happen is it'll put the onus on them to do their research. So this is kind of that whole adage of what I was talking about turning an outbound lead into an inbound lead. But it kind of puts the onus to research on your prospect. And if your content is clear on your homepage, it's very clear who you are going after and that it speaks to them. They will then connect the dots and reply to you with that context. And so I've always looked at all of these touch points, all 7 to 9 of them in our framework, as a ticket to a conversation period. Let them kind of connect the dots. We are consumers, so we kind of like to make our own decisions. There's something psychological about going, oh, this email was really interesting. Wait, let me see what Christina does, or let me see what Grayson does. Oh, that's kind of a cool product. I'm going to connect the dots myself and write you back and say, hey, Grayson, love this email, man. I was looking at the website. It looks like you guys do this. I am talking to 2 other companies that do this. Should I be lumping you into this evaluation? You get where I'm kind of going with that. You do get more insightful no's because people are coming to their own conclusions. So it's a little bit nuanced, but I just kind of wanted to throw that one out there too.
And I think it's a good
Yeah.
segue into Joe Banjuri's question, right? Is like, what kind of, if you don't get a response from this, what would the follow-up touch point be? Because that's the question I have for you. So on that thesis, on that direction, that path, I mean, are you providing more content? Are you providing more just resources and ways that they can interact with your company and educate themselves? What's your approach?
Yeah, so our touch points, additional touch points, all kind of follow the give process. And so we purposely we avoid the just checking in, just circling back, just following up. Did you get this? Thoughts, whatever.
Yeah, the Agoji response. Hey,
Yeah,
wanted to bump this up to the top.
And listen, I get it. Like I've been guilty, especially if I have someone who I've done a demo for already, and I don't know what to say in this. I'm just gonna say, hey, what can I put that's an alternative to just checking in that's still the same thing, right? But what we tend to do is we actually stay away from sharing our own content. We'll actually share content that is written or curated from thought leaders in their industry that we know that they will identify with and respect. And so here's an example of one, a follow-up touch point for you, Joe, that I think will be helpful. We'll say something, it's a reply to that original email. Hey, Grayson, by chance, do you read LinkedIn's recruiting blog? I find some of the content pretty insightful, especially this article on the 6 recruiting trends that will shape 2021. Hyperlink to it. It may be an interesting read for you, so thought I'd share. If you're up for it, would still love to get you scheduled for an intro call. What do you think? Very soft plug, still tying back to the fact that I really want to have a conversation with you, but just sharing something and not starting with that thoughts or just checking in. Did you get my email? All of those ones that we kind of all default to when we have no clue what to put in a bump.
Right.
Yeah.
And to quickly share my viewpoint, Joe, I know we only got about a minute left, but I would say for follow-ups, first of all, you should have some themes or multiple topics under your tool belt that you can use if you need to shift topics later in the cadence. But if this is a follow-up to this previous email, I would focus on just restating the email with a new twist. So if, I know we don't have the screen share still, but the four
I can jump
components
back
are
onto it.
basically, yeah, we can do that just real quick, but you can do that while I'm talking. Basically, like the four components are basically the intro, like why you're reaching out, the story or the context, like why does it matter, and then the offer or the incentive, why should you listen and take action, and then finally the CTA. So for follow-up, you could simply just kind of restate one of those four things in a different way. Maybe it's a new pain with the same challenge. Maybe you have a new reason why you're reaching out. Maybe you have a new thing that you want to show them. But I oftentimes find that people respond to follow-ups usually after just missing the email. It's not this. Oftentimes follow-ups work because they simply are busy and their inboxes are too full. So you can just reposition kind of what you're already talking about. It also gives you a lot of leverage for A/B testing then, because then if you have all of that documented, it's really easy to just kind of flip through the different ideas that you've been collecting over time.
Yeah, and I'll just finish up because we do have to wrap up here. It's 12. That I mean, for one of our industries, we know it so well. Like we know that there are 4 reasons people buy from us. Any of doesn't have to be all 4. They can be experiencing any one of those 4, and we're likely to at least have they're likely to be in a buying scenario. And so all of our sequences and scripts and everything are written around those 4 scenarios, right? And either getting them to rethink something and recognize that they're actually in that situation if they don't, if they don't believe that, or just helping them connect with us and see how they could remedy, alternative ways to think about instead of just plodding along with those 4 problems that they have. So I mean, that's for our sequences in that industry, and we have other industry verticals that we're not as well established in that we're still experimenting and figuring out and doing research. But yeah, I mean, having that ICP understanding, right? Really understanding what it's like in your buyer's world is really, really important, either for follow-ups off of the same idea or for, like you said, switching gears in a sequence in case one ends up not panning out.
Awesome. It does look like we're over time, but Christina, thank you so much for joining us today and giving us this material to review. Before we hop off, where can people who don't know who you are find out more about you or learn more about what you and Interstellar do?
Yeah, everything is on my LinkedIn profile. So feel free to reach out and connect with me. I think Joe's going to reach out so he can get my follow-up template. But yeah, I'm always happy to talk about cold email outreach any day of the week. So please don't be shy. Thanks for having me.
This is awesome. We'll definitely do it again.
Yay.
So yeah, just make sure to so check out we do this every Monday at 11:30 Eastern Standard Time. So would love to have everybody on the show that so please send us your cold emails if you want us to evaluate them. If you want to come on the show and join us as well, anyone in the audience, we're happy to have you and talk about this. Or if you don't want to appear on the show, we're connect with Grayson and I. We're happy to just, rewrite your cold email, evaluate some of the emails you receive. We're happy to do it.
Sweet.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.